This is part 6 of the Craftsman 6-inch joiner rebuild series. If you haven't seen part 5, click the link at the top of the screen. In this video, we will be modifying the power panel and then reworking the stator band for the motor. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. So this is the back side of the power panel, and this is one of the plugs that we're going to be modifying the power panel to hold. Note that there are two long screws that go all the way through the power panel, so we have to cut these holes towards the inside. But we have to be kind of careful because the thickness of the power panel is only enough that the switch, which is also protruding inside the panel, has to rest between these two plugs. So what I'm doing is basically measuring out the cutouts that we're going to be doing. And I'll mark all this up. And I'll speed this film up a little bit here in a second. But yeah, so the power panels were around in the 1940s and 50s and going into the 60s. So they didn't have grounded plugs on them. And that's why they are the way they are. So if we make sure that we've measured all this correctly, you'll see how this all kind of comes together after we make the cuts. Next, I'm going to use my Fordham, which is basically a Dremel, and a cutoff wheel that's on it, and we're just going to cut out those sections that I've got marked. And I'm cutting them just a shade less than what they need to be. So we're probably talking less than a millimeter difference here. And that's because we're going to refine these cuts with a file in a little bit. If you cut them too big, your plugs are going to come out whenever you're pulling on trying to unplug something. So now we're just going to use a file and clean up these cuts that we made and open them up a little bit so that those various receptacles and the plug will fit in them nice and tight. Again, I'll speed up the film here. So you can find these power panels on eBay. Sometimes they'll come with a tool, but I like them. It's, it's what Craftsman sold back in the day to go with these tools and the Pedestal tool stand. So that's why I think they look, period correct and kind of cool, kind of Art Deco-y once they're done and rebuilt. So you can see that as I'm filing, I'm just double checking to make sure that the receptacle and the plugs snap in there. And if they do, then we move on to the last hole. So we're going to rotate this. And if you're not figuring out how this thing works, basically you've got a or a plug coming off of the power panel, and that's what you plug into a drop cord. And then it has two receptacles in it, one that a light would plug into, and then one that the power or the motor plugs into. So the light would have constant power whether you've got the switch turned on or off, and the motor would only turn on when you flip the switch that's on the front side of the power panel. And that's because most of the work lights that were sold back then had their own on-off switch on the light itself. Of course, if you don't have one of these or you don't want to rebuild one, a simple surge protector would do kind of the same thing. So here I'm going to use some of these steel shims that I have. Find one that's got a nice thickness to it. And that one right there. And we're going to be making a plate that's going to fill the gaps in the back side of the power panel, because the original plugs were long, or the receptacles were longer than the square receptacles we're using. Otherwise, we're going to have some holes in the back. So I'm just getting some measurements here on this piece that I'm going to cut out. And then I'll trace it all down on the steel shim. I think I'm trying to figure out how I want to use the least amount of this shim material as possible. And so we've got the rectangle now, and then we need to trim the sides of it a little bit. It needs to have a gap on the sides because the cover, that's the cover there, actually rests inside the back side. So if we don't have a gap on each side of this shim material, the cover is going to protrude too much. And then we'll get an idea of what we need to cut. And even though I drew a couple of extra lines there, I'm not going to be cutting all of that. So we'll cut out the bottom part where the plug goes. And then we'll cut out that top part so that it sits flush, and it just needs to have a little bit trimmed off the top. Like so. And then we'll clean up that center part and then test fit it. And that looks good. So Now we just need to clean these parts and paint them and then assemble all that. All right, so this is the stator band, and that section there that's kind of clean was under the data panel for the motor. And that's how the whole stator band's supposed to look, but it's really rusted and really tarnished and really pitted. So normally what I do is I will just get some sheet steel and make one from scratch. But I decided, because I'd never done this before, I've never tried to clean one up and see if I could rework it. So that's what we're going to be doing, is we're going to rework this one rather than building one from scratch. So I first tried to sand all the rust and tarnish and whatever you want to call that, the pitting and everything on it, and it looks like it's getting it kind of uniform, but the camera doesn't do it justice. It just wasn't really working very well. So I needed to up my game. So we went to the angle grinder and some flap wheels. So I started with 40 grit. This is a 40 grit flap wheel. And that takes off a bunch of it. The only problem with using the angle grinder is you can kind of see those swirls that it leaves. And if you're going to try to get a mirror finish, you don't want that. But we'll work the 60 grit and then the 80 grit flap wheels and trying to get rid of some of that, those swirls. And then we're going to sand it using the palm sander, the orbital sander. And I think I started at 60 grit and worked my way up to 320 grit. And all we're trying to do here is get a uniform appearance across the stator band. At each level that we sand it at, we go up in grit, and there's multiple steps here. So I think I did 60, 80, 100, 150, maybe 120, and then 150, and then 220 or 240, and then 320. And if you skip steps in this, you're not going to remove the swirls from the previous sand. I do a lot of this, and when I do sanding on drill presses and stuff. So some of my other videos will cover it a little bit more in depth. But next is wet sanding. And I'm starting at, I think, 200 grit here. And I'm going to go 200 to 240 to 320 to 400. And once we're done with that, we'll go even higher. But the big thing with wet sanding is you've got to rinse between grits. If you don't, then you're defeating the purpose of the wet sanding. So after we finished with the 400, I got a bunch of additional discs, and we went 600, 800, 1,000, 2,000, and then 3,000. We'll see that here in a second. But you really can't tell, but there's a pretty good mirror finish on that already. But you can see the swirls. It's kind of filmy, and you can see those swirl lines really bad right now. But we'll be able to take care of most of that. this is the 800, then the 1000, then the 2000, and then the 3000. All right, so now we've got a pretty decent shine on there, although it looks really filmy because the light's shining on it. And we're going to need to clean it off and dry it off and clean up all of this work area that we've got, because the next stage is a polish. So we'll take that over to the sink and rinse it off and clean up all this work area. All right, so here we are. We've got it rinsed off. We'll just dry it off. And I know it doesn't look real shiny, but trust me, it's gonna work for what we're trying to do. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and lock it back down. And this is Mother's Mag and Aluminum Polish. I think that can is almost gone. You can get this stuff at your auto parts stores or Amazon. And this stuff is pure magic. We'll be using a lot of this stuff when we start cleaning up parts in the metal lathe a little bit later on. But yeah, it's going to do what we need it to do here. So we're just going to apply that, and then we're going to buff it. Boom, boom, boom. Here we go with the buffing pad. This is our first pass. And it's already doing its magic. And then we'll switch out that buffing pad for a clean one. Get up some of that polish so we're not spreading it again. And yeah, so you can see the reflection is pretty good. That's probably like an 8-inch shine or so, meaning I could stand a ruler on it and probably read 8 inches deep into it. But it's going to be perfect for what we need to do. Definitely not, you know, a mirror, but, you know, it's good enough for what we need. So the next thing we're going to do is I have a vinyl cutter, and I've already cut these lines out on my vinyl cutter. They're roughly 1/8 of an inch in width, and it's every other line. So all we're going to do is apply this directly over the stator band. What I do is I just line up that top edge with the stator band to keep those lines going nice and straight. And then I use a large tongue depressor to smooth all that onto the stator. And if anything gets messed up, we just peel it back and then rework it. And the contact film, which is that clear top film, is what keeps all those white 1/8 inch lines of vinyl perfectly aligned until you apply them. And then we'll peel the contact film off of there, leaving the vinyl lines. And make sure the vinyl is well adhered to the stator band. And now we're going to come back with a Scotch-Brite pad. And we're basically going to scuff all of the exposed stator band. We want to scuff it up really good. And even if I fabricated a replacement stator band, this is how I do the finishing on the stator band. I do it this exact same way. So we're just reusing this existing one, and it saves us a step or two. And this is made out of a nice thick piece of steel, so it had plenty of meat on it to be sanded. And you can already see what we accomplished. And that's pretty close to how the stator band is supposed to look. So I'm pretty pleased on how that turned out. I've been throwing away bad stator bands all these years instead of trying to rework them. Now that I know I can do this, that's what I'll be doing from now on. Unless they're too far gone. So, yeah. So all that's left is to spray this down with a good penetrating oil that will keep it from rusting, like super slick stuff, and then wipe it down. And then we'll set that aside after we get done there. Pretty cool. I'm glad that worked out. I was fully prepared to have to fabricate one from scratch, but yeah, no, that works out good. All right, so stuff to buy. This is your belt, and the belt I got is based on the fact that I have that belt cover. So this is a 37-inch by half-inch Cogged V-Belt that I got off of Amazon for $12.63. And I'll link all this stuff in the description. These are the blades that I purchased off of Amazon. And they're probably the most expensive thing. Well, one of the most expensive things I bought. So it came with 3 blades. And they were $24.95 off of Amazon. And then we have the 6202 5/8 bore NTN bearings. I got these off of eBay, and they were $9.98 a piece. NTN is a great bearing company. I love their bearings. And then we have these 2 87503 bearings, which will go in the motor. And I got those off of Amazon, and they were $12.99 a piece. And then I have a power cord that I'm going to be using on the motor. And then an extension cord that will go with the power panel. And then for the power panel, you're going to need 2 of these receptacles. You can get these off of Amazon. They're $7.99 a piece. And then you have the plug that I originally bought from Amazon, but they don't have any in stock, so you can buy them from Grand Brass. It's a lamp company. And they are $4.50 a piece. And that's going to wrap up this video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. As always, I appreciate the support. And in the next video, we will get to painting. And with that, I will see you next time.